Okay, quick music disclaimer here. I do not own the rights to this music, which belongs to the rightful owner, who is the intoxicating mind of Dr. Frankenstein. So he made my intro and my outro, and I hope you guys enjoy. Check them out on Spotify and YouTube, and no copyright infringement is intended. Have a good day.
A clear choice of good versus evil, of right versus wrong.
Twisted Tales.
Thanks for tuning back into Twisted Tales, folks. Today's little tale, I'm going to talk about a little restaurant that has a lot of history. So it's located in Halifax, Nova Scotia, 1740 Argyle Street, and it's called the Five Fisherman Restaurant. It's a quaint little spot where people go quite frequently. Amazing little seafood spot, but the building itself definitely has some history. Now, before it was a popular restaurant, it served as the city's most oldest mortuary, the Snow and Company Undertakers. This was established in 1883. It played a very important role in the recovery effort and burials that had resulted from the sinking of the RMS Titanic in 1912. It also helped a little bit with the Halifax explosion in 1917. So these are the two most major tragedies of the earliest 20th century. Now it's located in lovely downtown Halifax, a few blocks from Halifax Harbor and the ferry terminal. So the building had been originally constructed as a schoolhouse in 1817, and in 1883 the building was sold to John Snow, which he made it into a family mortuary, and that took up the space until 1973, and it's still a Halifax business today. Now the Five Fisherman Restaurant has been a pillar of the community in Halifax downtown scene since 1975. It also has a few little ghost tales as well, but we'll get into that after we talk about the Titanic recovery. Now, when the Titanic disaster happened, it was well known to the community of Halifax. So John Snow and Company Limited were contracted with White Star Agents. It's actually a shipping line that at one time had rose to become one of the most prominent shipping companies in the world. Now, April 15th, 1912, everybody pulled together with A.G. Jones and Company. Now, through these guys, they had chartered the commercial cable company's cable ship, the McKay Bennett, to search the waters where the Titanic had sunk, and if possible, they would try to recover the bodies of passengers and crew. So there was a big preparation for this. A lot of manpower was called upon, and everybody tried to get the rescue mission on the go. So, since all these companies were contracted with John Snow and Company, and that was actually becoming the largest undertaking firm in all of Nova Scotia, they had these guys help with the recovery project. Now, the firm was founded in 1883, and by 1912, it was a very notable and probably the most successful funeral home within the Maritimes. Now, many people respected the men who founded the company, because John Snow was a man who was around death quite a lot, and he did expect a high number of casualties. So asking for assistance from embalmers and undertakers from Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island wasn't a big deal because he was highly respected. So April 16th rolled around, and more than 40 members of the FDA Funeral Directors Association of the Maritimes, they had embarked for Halifax. So a woman named Mary Dodosky Walsh, she also owned a funeral home in St. John's, New Brunswick with her husband, had been assigned to embalm all the women and children. So as the embalmers were busy tackling the Halifax waterfront, Mr. Snow had ordered ice, and it was poured into the boat's tanks and holds to get everything ready for preparation. The embalmers, instructed by Snow, were to bring their own equipment and work instruments. They stored jugs of preserving chemicals to help preserve all the bodies that they were going to recover. Snow had also brought over about 100 caskets on board the vessel. They had begun to settle into their own rooms, awaiting the ship to depart. A man named Kenneth O'Hain came aboard also, and he was the main guy to conduct the burials at sea. Now, around 12:35 p.m., Wednesday, April 17th, 1912, they had left Halifax Harbor. The captain of the ship, F.H. Lerner, felt a little bit uneasy about the trip, but more so that it was mainly just because he had to fork out double wages to the crew for the difficult times over the next few days. So he was pretty much just being a cheapskate about the whole thing. Fuck that guy. So, soon enough, it was time to deal with the dead. And bombers were set up on deck at prep stations, boats were lowered into the sea, and about 51 bodies had been recovered at the time. So once the bodies were on board, they were treated with the utmost respect, the dignity that everybody gave them, and everybody progressed with the embalming procedure. So each body that had been recovered, a canvas with a stenciled number was written on it, and along with a ledger book, they had a description for each entry. Now that corresponded with each number. They put like hair color, height, age, tattoos, or birthmarks, or any other physical description that had to be recorded. Now, while the witness was present, they would gather a complete inventory of the contents of the dead's pockets. They recorded first, second, and third class. So, this could be easily more ID'd by classes. So the plan was as follows. First class will be embalmed first. Second and third class will be frozen and embalmed back in Halifax, because the port only allowed frozen or embalmed bodies back to the port. And also things like passports, cruise tickets, personal photos, everything was recorded. Now around 5 p.m. things started to wind down, and the boats were back aboard, and the preparations for 20 more bodies for embalmment had gotten ready later for that night. Now there was a lot of recovery for bodies, and they embalmed some, and they just gathered up some more, mostly which were crew of the Titanic. There were others that were non-identified, and others that were badly disfigured by the sea and other sea life. So these guys had to be buried at sea. And I mean, it sucks, but you can't really identify them if you can't find anything in their pockets or, see their faces or anything like that. But eventually, like, the total crew recovery at that couple days was, I think, 27 bodies. So when it was all said and done, Colonel John Jacobs Astor, he was one of the bodies among them. Now, Mr. Astor was like the richest passenger aboard the Titanic. He had a net worth of $87 million. So that's about, equivalent to $2.64 billion today? And that was in 1912. So he was among one of the richest people in the world before dying in the sinking of the mighty Titanic. But even the lifeboats and life jackets that the passengers had, they were easily to find because they were just floating around. But a lot of people had double the clothes to withstand the cold waters. Mostly all men were found with tobacco, matches, and vials of whiskey. Now, whiskey would also warm up the body if drinking quickly, as to, withstand the cold temperatures of the water. And the ship pretty much traveled around 19 miles back and forth, in and out of the wreckage. And around 4:30 a.m., they found another body. 14 hours later, 87 additional victims were recovered. They were searched, they were tagged, embalmed, and kept aboard. They had to ask for assistance and wired for help. A.G. Jones sent a second vessel in to help in the recovery. This was called the Minia, and as John Snow and the boys had been running out of caskets and low on embalming chemicals, Mr. Snow notified James Dempster of the situation. Now, Dempster kept his casket manufacturers busy, so he supplied about 150 more caskets to aid them. Now, the Minia had arrived on the site, and with two ships, everybody began to work together, and it was all very quicker. So, finding 14 more bodies, they were placed aboard the ship, the McKay Bennett, departing for Halifax, with the other bodies to be looked after. Over time, John Snow had made all the transfers and establishments with railroad companies for the transportation of the remaining bodies. Fees were to be established, but the American consulate kind of kiboshed that, suspending all formalities and fees for transfers of the bodies to the United States. Snow had also stepped up, and he sent flyers and news reports that the bodies were to be kept at the Mayflower Rink for a period of up to 2 weeks. So this would give families a little bit more time to collect their loved ones. Now, when all the bodies were sent to the rink, more came in and more came in. All were to be unloaded. And a large crowd had formed outside for people looking for their loved ones. They became very impatient at times. Some of them fainted, and there was a lot of crying. And a nurse named Nellie Remby, she went around with smelling salts on hand to help with the people fainting. I mean, so that's good on her. Like, she's there to help, right? Now, the Halifax coroner's office. This was located on the second floor of the rink. There were a lot of cases to process, and they felt like a little bit overwhelmed, but eventually they got through it, and they did everything with stride. Even valuables of the deceased were actually put into canvas bags, and a little log was taken to keep their contents. So this would allow them to be able to give the items back to the authorized people that claim them for the families. And there was also one embalmer named Frank Newell. He unexpectedly began to actually work on his uncle to embalm him, and he didn't notice it was him. And that guy's name was actually Arthur W. Newell. He was a first-class passenger, and when Frank Newell seen this, he collapsed due to shock. And that's a real sad way to find out about things, for sure. Like, finally, after that, all the dedicated work was finished. The bodies were all prepared, and the identification process could now go underway. And the burials of the bodies could soon begin. They used, 3 cemeteries in Halifax? And once the burial process began, churches around Halifax started having their own memorial services. So out of about 209 bodies as it goes now, all were found by the ships out there. 4 have remained at the rink. The last Titanic burial was, I believe, in June. So the White Star Lines had also deposited $7,500 with the Royal Trust Company to take care of the graves for the Titanic victims. So there's actually another little huge part of history here that the building and the owners were involved with at the time. They're actually drawn into the Halifax explosion on December 6, 1917. Now, the explosion claimed around 2,000 lives. So Snow's funeral home and the surrounding funeral homes about the city all pulled together to play a huge role to help with the sad state of affairs due to the tragedy. So John Snow's funeral home held services for the 2,000 victims of the explosion. So they held services at a rate about 30 or 40 services per day. So kind of as the First World War kind of blew through Europe, Halifax was a huge port city. Now that played a huge factor in the First World War. So 2 ships were in the water near the port. The Norwegian IMO and the French Mont Blanc. No, they collided with each other. The Mont Blanc had been filled with highly explosive cargo, like pitric acid, TNT, high-octane gas, along with some gun cotton. Now, the pitric acid had set ablaze when the ships collided, and this was almost instantly. The crew had abandoned the ship, and most got to shore, and they began warning people in the town, but nobody really listened. And a huge crowd began to form. Instead of mostly running away, they just sat and watched. Now the fire department, they responded, but upon the time of arrival, the Mont Blanc had exploded. And it roughly killed about 2,000 people, 9,000 injured, and it destroyed pretty much all the northern part of Halifax. After the Snow and Company funeral home had the coffins all set up, they were piled about 3 stacks high. So after all the services were finished, everything was kind of getting back to normal. That's where most of the ghost stories began to start. The Fisherman restaurant had opened its doors in 1975, and people tell many a tale of the ghost stories that happened in the area after the two historic events. Now, some say that the number of ghost activity became a high number, and restaurant patrons recall like glasses flying off shelves, sinks began to turn on and off. Like, I guess ghosts wanted to stay clean too, I guess. But people also felt cold breezes in the air of the restaurant, almost like ghosts were moving through the customers. Employees who worked there late at night would often hear voices, and sometimes they'd hear their names. But nobody was around for miles, and nobody could figure it out. Like, I'm working all alone, and there's this crazy shit going on. One employee recalls seeing a gray mist that had turned into a person and began to fly towards her. After that, she kind of just took off in panic. She didn't stick around to find out anything. Others remember hearing the ringing of a bell, as if a customer had been up front waiting. And when the staff went to help the customer, the apparition had disappeared. Even the staff, like, all of them would remember, like, sort of a tapping sound. And others felt that things were brushing up against them, or they'd feel like a kind of a touch on the cheek at different times when they were serving and waiting on tables. The restaurant definitely has some history, like the ghosts, the two historical events, the Halifax explosion, and the sinking of the Titanic. I mean, all over history, the timeline to it is fascinating, and not a lot of people would know that. Like, they're like, oh, it's just a restaurant or whatever, but the history to it all is fucking fascinating. And even the scary stories to go along with it, for all the supernatural shit that goes on. I mean, there was lots of death in that area. And there's even like a tale of a fresh new dishwasher that started his first shift there. He was at the dish pit all alone, scrubbing dishes and shit. And he heard a sound, kind of like a banging. And he looked up and seen a specter kind of fly through the kitchen. And he did not stick around to finish out his shift, I'll tell you that. And he told his manager that the place was haunted and that he seen it with his own eyes. In turn, all these tales kind of gravitated people to the popular restaurant. And its popularity grows each day. And the second floor that was actually used as a morgue is now a winery. So it's cool how all the renos came about and the restaurant's popular. And it's more so with the ghost stories that draw people there, not actually the history behind the scenes. So, I mean, like, if you're ever in that area, I mean, just pop by, book a spot, and you'll get some historic info to pass on to your friends. And, you know, you can have some drinks and spread the tales of ghosts around, right, for people that don't know. So, I guess if you book a reservation and you're brought to a table by a floating menu book, just don't panic, sit down and hang out. It'll be a beautiful time. Yeah, I know, that was terrible. But with that, that's my little tale of a restaurant history of Halifax. So, I hope you guys all enjoy the rest of your weekend. Stay safe. Thanks for all the follows and likes, too. And email me here, too, if you want some shit done. Like, I'll write stories for you. I don't care. I'll give you a shout out, whatever you want me to do. So, you guys take care. I'll throw the email in the link. Thanks for everything you guys do, man.
Twisted Tales.